Welcome back to the cryptowrld channel, everyone. My name is Josh, and this important indicator right here just flashed a Bitcoin bottom signal. And on top of that, we're currently seeing some new Bitcoin patterns form, which I'll be talking more about that later in the video. Definitely stick around. First of all, giving you a quick update on this daily Bitcoin chart, and obviously with the recent bounce over the past 1 to 2 days, we have now seen the Bitcoin price reclaim this previous level of support, which was sitting at around $29,000 to $30,000 per Bitcoin as a range of support. So now the next thing that Bitcoin needs to do in order to potentially flip a little bit more bullish here in the shorter term is if we see a daily candle close back above 30,000. Now, I want to make it clear that if we do end up seeing that daily candle close above 30,000, that doesn't necessarily confirm a full bullish reversal or anything like that. It would simply just confirm the fact that we have officially reclaimed this range of support, which would be a good sign for Bitcoin, at least in the shorter term, because it shows us that we're making some bullish progress here. And if you zoom in a little bit closer down into the 4-hour time frame, what we could see is actually a small bullish divergence that is currently forming on smaller time frames. And basically, this just means that we should be expecting reduced bearish momentum in the shorter term, which usually means either sideways price action or some slight bullish price action. But once again, not necessarily a full bullish reversal or anything like that. So for the most part, when you're talking about the shorter term, as in the next few days, honestly, I would be expecting mostly sideways choppy price action around that $29,000 to $30,000 level of support, or slightly above that level of support if we see that daily candle close above 30,000. But basically, the Bitcoin price needs some time to actually stabilize after that drop. And if you're simply looking at some previous Bitcoin crashes, you can see that we do this pretty much every single time, where we see the initial crash and then we see a lot of sideways choppy price action immediately after. So once again, that would most likely occur in the shorter term, speaking about the next few days or so. But if you're zooming out to the 3-day Bitcoin chart, as I mentioned yesterday, the Bitcoin price obviously hit that price target for this bear flag pattern, which was sitting at around 25,000, right in between these moving averages, which are the 1,000-day simple moving average and the 200-week simple moving average. And when you're zooming out on the weekly Bitcoin chart, historically speaking, the best possible times to accumulate Bitcoin have occurred when the Bitcoin price falls in between these two moving averages. And so far, at the time of recording this video, obviously if you bought at around 25,000, you're doing pretty good in the shorter term. But as I've mentioned quite a few times recently on the channel, if you're looking at the weekly Bitcoin RSI, technically speaking, this does have a little bit more room to the downside before we enter into oversold territories, which means technically speaking, the Bitcoin price also does have some room to the downside. If, for example, the stock market keeps dumping, we could re-enter this price range in between these moving averages. And by the way, these moving averages are coming in between 22,000 and 28,000. But it's also important to mention that during the March 2020 crash, for example, we did enter into this price range in between these two moving averages, but the weekly Bitcoin RSI did not enter into oversold territories that time around. So these are just some of the things that we need to be thinking about. And in terms of my personal Bitcoin strategy, going off all of these charts and indicators, by default, I am slowly dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin. But as I've mentioned over and over again on this channel, anytime the Bitcoin price enters into this price range, I'm talking about in between 22,000 and 28,000. And especially when we hit that $25,000 price target, I accumulated a lot more Bitcoin on top of my regular dollar cost averaging. But staying on the weekly Bitcoin chart and just bringing out the volume indicator, which is one of the most common indicators for Bitcoin. And historically speaking, this indicator has been very accurate at telling us whether or not the Bitcoin price might have bottomed out. Because for example, taking a look at the 2018 bear market, we saw obviously a lot of bearish price action and then a lot of sideways price action, leading into one last crash, one last capitulation to the downside, where we basically saw maximum fear. We saw a lot of people panicking in the market at that stage. And during that final capitulation event at the end of that bear market, we saw a massive spike in volume. A lot of Bitcoin changed hands during that crash, which basically means the panic sellers were selling into strong hands, the people that are holding Bitcoin for the much longer term, that are not even thinking of selling. And so eventually we ran out of panic sellers, and it was only the hodlers, the long-term investors that were left, which simply bought up the bottom of the 2018 bear markets. And we also saw something very similar during that March 2020 crash. That was an extremely violent crash. The Bitcoin price basically crashed around 50% in one single day. And leading up to that capitulation event, we saw a bit of a downturn in the price of Bitcoin, and then a lot of sideways price action, one last pump, and then the final capitulation event where we saw a lot of Bitcoin change hands from panic sellers to long-term hodlers. And once again, we can prove that that was was happening by looking at the massive spike in volume. A lot of Bitcoin was transacted during that time period, during that capitulation. And so that massive spike in volume essentially marked the bottom for Bitcoin. We also saw something very similar during May last year, obviously a massive crash in the Bitcoin price. And pretty much in the final stage of that crash, we saw a huge spike in volume, showing a massive amount of Bitcoin changing hands. And just this week, because remember, this is on the weekly time frame, each one of these candles is an entire week. So just this weekly candle, we have now seen another massive spike in volume, showing a massive amount of Bitcoin has changed hands. So once again, what this means is a lot of weak hands, a lot of panic sellers have been wiped out of the markets, and the majority of Bitcoin holders remaining are basically long-term holders, the ones that are buying these lows and holding for the much longer term, that don't really care too much about the short-term price action. And we can actually prove that by looking at on-chain Bitcoin metrics. For example, this right here shows the percent of Bitcoin supply that was last active 1 year ago or more. So basically, this orange line shows us how much Bitcoin the Bitcoin hodlers are holding. So the ones that are holding Bitcoin for at least 1 year or more. And right now, the percent of Bitcoin supply that has not moved in at least 1 year is actually at an all-time high of above 65% of the total supply. So nearly 2/3 of Bitcoin supply hasn't even moved at all in over 1 year. And obviously, this is continuing to increase as of recent, showing a massive accumulation by the long-term Bitcoin holders, as the short-term Bitcoin holders are essentially panic selling. Now, it is also important to mention that nothing is 100% guaranteed. So even though these indicators have been very accurate historically speaking, if the stock market keeps dumping, for example, then that could change the situation. We could end up forming another low. But what is good to see, at least for today, is a bit of a bounce happening in the NASDAQ and pretty much in the overall stock market in general. Now, obviously, this is just one bounce and certainly does not confirm a bullish trend or anything like that. But this is still definitely something to keep an eye on, because like I've been saying, if the stock market actually bottoms out, then that would really help assist the Bitcoin price and really the overall crypto market in a bullish recovery. And if you're looking at the NASDAQ 100 index on the weekly time frame, you can see that the weekly RSI is extremely close to oversold territories, and it was pretty much at oversold territories yesterday towards this bottom. But obviously, since yesterday, we've seen a bit of a bounce, which has bounced the RSI back up as well. And if you're looking at the last time the weekly RSI for the NASDAQ 100 index was this low, that was during the March 2020 crash. And the time before that was in the 2018 bear market, where we saw a bear market for the stock market and a bear market for Bitcoin. So we definitely have some very interesting times right now. Once again, if the stock market follows through with a potential bottom, then that would heavily assist the Bitcoin price in confirming more of a bullish recovery, considering the fact that we already have a few bottom signals on the Bitcoin chart itself. But anyway, if you found this video useful or simply enjoyed us, please make sure to leave a like down below. And if you're new, make sure to subscribe for more videos just like this every single day. And if you want to maximize your profits in crypto, make sure you're checking out one of these uploads popping up right here, because both of these videos reveal ways to make more money in crypto, even if prices are going up, down, or sideways. But anyway, that is it for this update. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video.